I was sitting in Karen's living room, completely at ease, a cold beer resting in my hand, laughing at something Spencer said about the neighbor's overgrown hedges. The kind of afternoon that feels too ordinary to remember. No tension, no edge, no reason to watch the clock or the ceiling or the staircase. Just two men, cold drinks, and a quiet house. Then it happened. A scream cut straight through the walls, high, sharp, and unmistakably my son's voice. My body moved before my mind could catch up. The beer hit the cushion, my feet hit the floor, and then came the thud. Not a stumble, not a fall from a chair. Something heavier, something final, something that shook the walls like the house itself flinched. I yanked the front door open and stopped cold. Dylan was on the concrete below the balcony, still, silent, and I felt something inside me break that has never fully healed since. Welcome to Prodigy Tales. What you're about to hear is the story of how one woman's calculated cruelty destroyed her own life, and how justice, when it finally arrived completely. Karen had been ruling this neighborhood long before I moved in, not through kindness or competence, but through the particular brand of small power that small people clutched the tightest. She had fined residents for trash bins, left out 8 minutes past collection. She had summoned emergency board meetings over grass height, measured to the half-inch. She had written formal complaints about wind chimes. Wind chimes. The woman treated a residential community like a kingdom she personally inherited. And for years, nobody pushed back hard enough to matter. I decided to look closer. What I found wasn't just pettiness. It was theft dressed in paperwork. HOA funds quietly redirected toward overpriced personal purchases, vanity renovations that benefited only her property, and expenses so bizarre they would have been funny if they weren't paid for with our money. I spent weeks documenting everything. Receipts, bank statements, side-by-side comparisons of what was approved versus what was spent. I walked into that HOA meeting with a folder so airtight, Karen's expression shifted the moment I opened it. By the time I finished presenting, the board had gone completely silent. Karen's face cycled through denial, calculation, and then something I had never seen on her before, shame. They suspended her that same evening. I expected screaming. I expected threats slipped under my door at midnight, or a parade of passive-aggressive complaints filed against every inch of my property. What I got instead was silence. Complete, unbroken, unsettling silence. That silence should have been a 5-alarm warning. Instead, I took it as a victory. That was my first mistake. 3 days after the suspension, Karen knocked on my door. I opened it expecting coldness, maybe a veiled threat wrapped in a polite sentence. What I found instead stopped me completely. She was smiling. Not the tight, performative smile she wore at board meetings, but something softer, almost convincing. She thanked me. Said the suspension had been exactly what she needed. That she had been carrying too much, controlling too much, and that my exposing her was, and I remember this word precisely, a gift. I stood in my own doorway, genuinely unsure whether I was being pranked. This was the same woman who had once filed a formal complaint because my welcome mat was a 1/4 inch outside the approved boundary. Now she was standing here talking about personal growth, like she had spent the week at a wellness retreat. My instincts did not soften, they sharpened, because there is a particular kind of danger that only arrives wearing a warm expression. Then she mentioned the boys. Terry and Dylan had been friends long before any of this started, and she didn't think it was fair to let adult conflict bleed into their world. She suggested a playdate, simple, innocent, reasonable. Everything about it made logical sense, which is precisely what made it feel wrong. I agreed, but I added one condition without hesitation. I would be there. Something shifted behind her eyes, for just a fraction of a second. A blink that came a little too quickly, a smile that returned a little too deliberately. She said Friday would be perfect and left without another word. That night I lay awake listening to the silence in my house, turning the conversation over and over in my mind. I told myself I was overthinking it, that people do change, that not everything is a setup. I almost believed it. Friday arrived the way dangerous days often do. Quietly, unremarkably, dressed in ordinary light. I drove Dylan to Karen's house telling myself the unease I felt was just habit. Spencer answered the door looking genuinely relaxed, the kind of relaxed that belongs to a man who has recently had a long exhale after years of held breath. He welcomed us in warmly, and I noticed immediately how different the house felt. Sunlight fell through clean windows. Something warm was baking somewhere in the back. Toys scattered across the living room floor the way they only do in homes where children are actually happy. Dylan kicked off his shoes at the door, shouted Terry's name up the staircase, and was gone before I could say anything. Just like that, my son disappeared upstairs, laughing, completely safe in the way that only children can feel, totally and without question. Spencer handed me a cold beer and we fell into conversation the way men do when there is nothing pressing to resolve. Sports, the neighborhood, a barbecue he was planning for the following weekend. I was comfortable, present, genuinely at ease for the first time in weeks. A few minutes passed before Karen appeared at the edge of the room. She smiled briefly, said she was going to check on the boys, and moved toward the staircase without waiting for a response. I nodded and turned back to Spencer. I did not watch her climb the stairs. I did not track her footsteps. I had no reason to. That is the detail that has never stopped haunting me. The scream came without warning, high, terrified, and so unmistakably Dylan that my body was already moving before the sound finished traveling down the stairs. Spencer's beer hit the floor. I was at the front door before I understood why. Then the thud, not a sound, a force. Something that moved through the walls and the floor, and the soles of my feet simultaneously. I threw the door open, and the world outside stopped making sense. Dylan was on the porch concrete below the balcony. His small body folded at an angle that bodies are never supposed to fold. Blood was spreading beneath his head slowly and darkly the way it does in moments you spend the rest of your life trying to unsee. His chest moved, barely, in shallow, uncertain intervals. His mouth was open like he was searching for air that kept arriving just short of enough. I dropped to my knees. My hands found him but had no idea what to do. They shook so violently, I was afraid to hold him and more afraid to let go. I called his name. Then I begged. The kind of begging that bypasses language entirely and becomes something raw, something that lives below words. Above me, Karen appeared at the balcony railing. Her voice floated down with a composure that still makes my blood cold when I think about it. "He jumped," she said. I swear he jumped. Spencer was already on the phone. The paramedics arrived and moved with the focused silence of people trained to work inside the worst moments of other people's lives. Oxygen mask. Pulse check. Tense, clipped exchanges between them that I could hear but not process. They stabilized him carefully, transferred him to the stretcher, and told me they would do everything possible. Their eyes told a more honest and far more frightening story. I stood at the railing long after the ambulance disappeared, hands gripping the wood, unable to move, unable to think, unable to do anything, except remain exactly where my son had been breathing moments before. The police separated everyone before the ambulance had even turned the corner. Spencer stood on the grass looking pale and hollowed out, like a man trying to process two realities at once. Karen positioned herself behind the patrol car, composed, measured, already constructing the version of events she intended to deliver. She told the officers she had barely seen anything, that it happened so fast, that she couldn't explain it. She used the word tragic 3 times in 4 sentences, and each time it landed with the hollow sound of a word being worn as a costume rather than felt as a truth. Then Terry stepped forward, Karen's own son. 11 years old, face streaked with tears, voice barely holding itself together, and yet completely, unflinchingly clear. He told the officers exactly what he had watched his mother do. He did not hesitate. He did not soften it. He stood in the driveway of his own home and described, with the devastating precision that only a child telling the absolute truth can manage, how his mother had called Dylan onto the balcony, gripped his wrist, pulled him toward the railing, and pushed him over with a deliberateness that left no room for accident or misinterpretation. The officers asked Spencer's permission to review the camera footage from Terry's bedroom. He nodded without speaking. Within minutes, everything Terry said was confirmed in full. The footage showed Karen crossing the balcony with calm, purposeful steps. It showed her taking Dylan's wrist. It showed her pulling him forward. And it showed her pushing him, not in a moment of panic, not in a flash of anger, but with a steadiness that made every officer in that driveway go visibly quiet. There was nothing left to argue. Karen was handcuffed without drama, without her signature theatrics, without a single word. She stared straight ahead as they led her away, and for the first time in all the years I had known her, she had absolutely nothing to say. The court delivered its verdict with the kind of quiet finality that renders everything before it irrelevant. 22 years in state prison for attempted murder and child endangerment. $468,000 in restitution, $150,000 in punitive damages. Her home ordered for sale. Every account she owned drained to satisfy what no amount of money could ever fully repair. The HOA position she had weaponized against an entire neighborhood for years, it's gone. The reputation she had polished and protected and used as a shield, gone. The life she had constructed on the foundation of other people's fear and compliance, dismantled in a single morning by the testimony of her own child, and the footage from a bedroom camera she never thought to check. There is a particular justice in that. Not the loud, dramatic kind she would have performed for an audience, The quiet, permanent kind that simply closes a door and does not reopen it. Dylan recovered. Not all at once, and not without cost. But he came back. First a small squeeze of my hand that I felt in every part of my chest at once. Then words, careful and slow, like someone relearning a language they were briefly forced to forget. Then steadiness. Then mornings that felt like mornings again, rather than the aftermath of something. I will never take ordinary for granted again. Not a cold beer on a quiet afternoon. Not the sound of my son laughing somewhere in a house I cannot see him. Not a single unremarkable moment. Karen spent years making people feel powerless inside their own homes. In the end, she lost hers entirely. If this story reached you, wherever you are in the world, drop your city in the comments below. Like and subscribe for more. We are just getting started.